Hello, it's Karen here. I've got the second of your LGC card projects from my class. So we're using the To a Wild Rose bundle. And this time we're going to be making a card that is a single layer card with the exception of the sentiment, if you have a look. So we're going to be learning some masking techniques, and we're also going to be doing some stenciling and things. So I'll just pop this card up out of the way as a point of reference for me, and then we will get on with making the card. So I'm going to be using the Pretty Peacock ink again today because I really enjoy playing with it. We're also going to need some Old Olive ink. That's going to be for our leaves, and also some Smoky Slate ink, and that'll be for our masking a bit later on. So we're going to need the Stamparatus back again. So I designed this card so that we could literally do everything on with the stamps in one place. So hopefully this is all going to work out for me. So first of all, I'm going to take my piece of Whisper White cardstock, and I'll just pop the magnet on the top there. And yet again, I'm going to ink up the outline stamp of the rose, and I'm going to press that over on my card. Lovely. And then I'm going to turn my card around, pop my magnet on again, and ink up the outline image for the second time and place that over there. So I'll just give this stamp a bit of a wipe up so I don't get inky fingers when I turn around. So I'm going to flip the Stamparatus plate around. So I've now got the second layer of stamping. So that's not the complete solid, that's the partial solid one. And I'm going to ink that up with my Pretty Peacock ink again. And just like the last card we made, I don't really want this ink to be at full strength. So I'm going to put a piece of scrap paper down. I'm going to take off my first generation of ink on my scrap paper, and then I'm going to put my second generation of ink down on my flower. Then I'm going to turn the cardstock around, and then I'm going to be able to repeat exactly the same thing on this side. So there we go. So scrap paper in the way to take some of that ink off for us. So first generation of ink stamped off on scrap paper, and the second generation is stamped on there. So I'm just going to give that a quick clean up and take it out of the way now. So that's the Stamparatus done with for this card. The next part of the stamping I'm actually going to do on a block, because I need to place it randomly where I would like to place it. So I've got my Old Olive ink and I've got my stamp image here. I've chosen to go with the second layer of the leaf stamp, so it's not the outline edge and it's not the completely solid leaf, it's the second layer. Now to stamp my leaves, we're going to need to do a bit of masking. Excuse me a moment while I'm just swapping chairs over at my desk, because if I sit on my really creaky one, trust me, it'll really do your head in. So what I've done is I've used the die from the die set, this one here, this open die, and I've used it to cut myself some masks from copy paper. So I was actually able to layer up 3 sheets of copy paper folded in half, and this die very easily cut through basically 6 layers at once. So I was able to quickly create lots of masks, and I'll show you in a moment, but I've also done the same thing with the leaf die. I've created lots and lots of leaf masks. So now what I want to do is I want to mask these flowers so that I can stamp some leaves. So for this part of the process, I'm just going to hold these masks. I'm not going to stick them down. And when you're masking, so that you don't get an outside, like a white edge, it's important that you hold your mask literally just on the inside of your stamp. So now I'm going to ink up my leaves rather, just give them a little test. That's lovely. Ink up my leaves, and then I'm going to stamp them off and give it a good press near the edge so that you don't end up with a white line. And you can see now that those leaves are perfectly placed behind my flower. So I can line up my image again. So make sure I'm just inside the white lines because I don't want a white edge. And then there I go again. Make sure I give it a good press down so that I've got my leaves placed beautifully on there. So I can use the same mask, but you must be sure that you don't get these too saturated with ink, because if you do, you really do need to throw them away and get a new one, because otherwise the ink could transfer through onto your image. So now I'm going to layer up on this flower on this side, and I'm going to stamp some leaves. So again, lovely. The trick with masking is whatever image you want to be at the front of the card, at the uppermost, is the one that you would stamp first. And then you build up, basically mask off to build up the layers behind it. So I'm going to do some more more leaves rather. So press down firmly on that edge, just there, and perhaps we'll go for, oh, do you know what? I think I'm going to go for another one down here. So I just need to find the orientation of the mask. So it's somewhere around about here. And I really just want a bit of a single leaf to come off the bottom there. Oh, that's lovely. And I think I may well do the same just up at the top here. So I'll turn my panel back round again and line that up and then stamp it so I've literally just got the one leaf coming out the side. Okay, so that's me all finished with that paper mask. I'm going to pop that in the bin, and I've also now finished with the leaf stamp, so I shall just put that to one side. So the next thing we need to do, finished with the green ink as well, now I can pop that to one side. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually mask off all of the leaves and the flowers so that we can put a stencil background over the top and apply some ink, because if we didn't mask anything off, that stencil background would be, oh excuse me, would be all over our leaves and flowers as well. So friend for when we're masking off like this, if you haven't used proper masking paper, and there is such a thing, but to be honest, copy paper and a little bit of snail does the job. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the tiniest little dab of snail in the middle. I don't know if you can see that. In fact, it is almost a non-existent bit of snail in the middle. So I've put just a tiny bit of snail in. I'm now going to put that on the back of my hand so it picks up some oils off the back of my hand to make it barely sticky at all. Then I'm going to place this mask over my flower. Now, unlike with the stamping, when we do this stenciling, we may well get a very slight amount of haloing around the outside, but you really won't notice it, but you really would have noticed it with the stamping, which is why I did some masking off with the stamping. So let's try and find our mask like that. So that's brilliant. And now we're going to need some leaf masks as well. So when you die cut, I'm sure you realise this, but you kind of get some curvature on your die. If you ensure that you're putting your adhesive on the reverse of that, so I'm going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because otherwise it won't match up when you lay it down. So I'm just going to put the tiniest bit of snail on one of the leaves. It's just going to be enough just to hold it in place while we do our stenciling. And again, I need to get some of the oils from my hands onto that stencil so that it doesn't stick too much, because I don't want it tearing my card when it's served its purpose. So I'm going to carry on now, taking some of the stickiness out of the snail before I lay down my masks over my stamping. Oh, is that one? Oh, I think I took a bit too much of the sticky out of that one. Let's try that again. So there's a little bit of effort required for this kind of technique, but I think it's really well worth it when you can get such a lovely detailed image just using a single layer. It's really very pleasing when the finished result. So last one is just that final leaf down there. Oh, my flower seems to have that bottom flower moved. Right, let's peel those masks off, put my flower mask back in place, and then we'll pop those leaf masks back on again. I'm sure you'll get it right first time, unlike me. There we go, and the final one just about there. Okay, so I've now covered up all of our stamping, and now it's time we can lay our mask over the top. Now what you can do is, if you turn your stamped piece over, and you can line it up nicely, and then you can use something like a removable tape. So you could use washi tape that you've taken a bit of the stick out of. You could use masking tape that you've taken some stick out of. I tend to have some Scotch removable tape on hand because I find that's really helpful and never ever tears my card. Okay, so I've got my stamped piece covered in masks and now covered in a stencil. I'm going to take a bit of one of our stamping sponges, and I'm going to take some smoky slate ink. I'm going to get that up onto my sponge, and I'm going to work it into the sponge, because this is a newly used sponge and it's actually quite a new ink pad as well, and I don't want this to be super dark. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some ink to my stamped panel through my stencil. I want this to be quite faint, I want it to be quite subtle, and I don't necessarily want it to cover the whole of the stamped piece underneath. I might perhaps go in just for a little touch more. So I'm going around in between those flowers, around those flowers, and then I could have a little peek through the top to see if I've achieved what I want to achieve. I perhaps just want a little bit there and a little bit there, and I'll now have a peek at the bottom, and I'll perhaps just have a little bit in that bottom corner, and I think, to be honest with you, that's going to be enough. I want it to be quite subtle, not super duper in your face. So I'll pop those masks away, I can use those another time. So now I can remove my stencil, I can remove my removable tape. It really is removable, wonderful stuff. And then I can start to take off the paper masks. Now with them, these really aren't sticking very much at all, but if you give snail a bit of a twist, that's the best way to get it off. So now I'm going to pop those masks over there, because I think we can probably get away with using those again. So now I've got my stamped piece that's got some subtle brick background. Now you can leave it here if you want to, or you could add some splats to it, as I've done with the original sample. So to do that, I'm going to take my Memento dye ink. Because it's a dye ink, it means it's water soluble, and I'm just going to get a little bit on one of the smallest little A blocks. Then I'm going to take an aqua painter. I'm going to squeeze my aqua painter gently to get a drop or two onto that ink block, and then I'm going to get a nice liquid preparation of my ink, and then I'm going to tap my aqua painter on my finger to drop some of that ink on my card. So there you go, it just gives it some nice arty splats. Now obviously if you didn't want any on the flowers, you could keep those covered up, and you wouldn't end up with any inky splats on there. So I'm just going to move the messy stuff over to one side. Now we are going to need to leave that to dry just for a few seconds, because the ink's a little bit more concentrated, and I think it would be wise for me to also turn over the grid paper. There we go. So I'll just turn that over and check we're still in camera. Yes, all seem to be well. And for the greeting, I've actually used the Story Label punch. So this is a punch that was first available during Celebration earlier this year, and it's now available in the annual catalogue. So I'm going to punch a piece of that out of Smoky Slate. And then I'm going to use the Pretty Peacock ink again to stamp this hello sentiment onto there. And that's lovely. And now it's going to be a case of putting our card together. So we've got our sentiment, we've got our piece over there that's just drying off. We need a Whisper White card base for this. So I'm going to take my trimmer, still using one of the old style Stampin' Up ones. I think we might have a new one on the way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this cardstock at 10.5 centimetres. So that's trimming an A4 sheet in half, or that's 4 1/8 of an inch. Then I'm going to turn it onto the long side, and I'm going to score it. So that's the lighter colour blade if you're using one of these style trimmers. I'm going to score it at 14.9 centimetres or 5 7/8 of an inch, and that will give us our card base. Just make sure I've got cleanish hands. Yeah, they'll do, I think. So that gives us our card base. I'm just going to grab my bone folder to give that a little bit of a burnish so that sits down nicely. Now I can't see any damp spots on there, so I think that's all now dried. So we're going to go in for lots of dimensionals. I'm going to put dimensionals on the back of the stamped panel. So definitely we want one in each corner. I think we'll go for one down each side. Then we'll go for one in the top half and one in the bottom half at the centre. Bear with me a second while I peel off all those little backings. Oh yeah, that's all nice. And so I'm just going to open out my card now so that I can, now this is identical, this card. Obviously the splats are in different orientations and the leaves are in slightly different orientations, but no, I think I want to go that way. So we're going to place this down, and it's got quite a narrow border all the way round, because that piece of Whisper White is cut to 0.5 centimetre shorter and narrower, or 1/4 inch shorter and narrower. And then finally a couple of dimensionals on the sentiment punched out shape. Just take those backs off as well. And then we can position this wherever we would like on the card. And I think this time, oh, I don't know, I think I put it really quite central last time. Do you know, I think I'm just going to do the same because I like that design. I'm just going to line it up on my grid paper so that I can hopefully get it nice and square. So there we go. So that's how you make the second card of my summer Let's Get Creative projects. I really hope you enjoy and perhaps have a go at recreating these at home or using the techniques at home with some other sets that you've got. Thank you. Bye bye.